afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Mostly ladies. It's usually the other way around. So I'm happy to see more faces of women in the room. Is very relevant to our discussion matter. But I am also pleased to see men from different walks of life and from different places in the world who are interested in empowering women. Our third speaker is Aisha Osori. I hope I am correctly pronouncing your name. She is the CEO of the Nigerian Women's Trust Fund. She is a lawyer and consultant with over 12 years of experience in corporate and regulatory practice, strategic communication, change communications, and gender advocacy. She has, I think up until recently, you were writing in national publications of Nigeria. I know, having looked at your columns, I realize how much you are committed to women's role in society, education of girls in Nigeria, and I'm sure we are looking forward to hear your case study. But before we start, let me remind our audience that you are holding a law degree from Harvard University, and then you are an Eisenhower Fellow. Okay, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The Nigerian Women's Trust Fund is a non-profit organization that's set up to focus on trying to get more women into government and decision-making. But of course, we know that one of the major challenges to that is having women who are economically empowered and who are free from violence. So those are two areas that we also look at a lot as we tell our story. What are the consequences of women not being economically empowered? I think it's very important. Can you all hear me? Okay. All right. I think it's very important to remind ourselves.
You could speak up a little bit.
I think it's very important to remind ourselves of this question. And I'd like to start by telling a personal story. My maternal grandfather only had 14 children. And it's not clear how he decided out of the 7 boys and 7 girls who would go to school. Luckily for me, my mother was one of the girls who went to school. It wouldn't really seem very important, but I wouldn't be here today if my mother hadn't gone to school. Because when I was 14, my dad died, and as a civil servant, he had less than, in today's currency, $200 in his account. So, and there were 4 of us, and I was the oldest, and I was 14. So the truth is, if I didn't have a mother who could work, we would have to have moved back to the village, and I would probably have had to marry or find some other skill, and I wouldn't be here. So for me, it's really very important that women are economically empowered. So I just want to give a brief overview of Africa and what the situation is before I talk about Nigeria. In Africa today, half of those who are self-employed are women, but only a quarter of those are employers. And female ownership of firms ranges from as low as 4.2% in Eritrea to as high as 61% in Côte d'Ivoire. And in Mozambique, Senegal, and Uganda, people spend a collective of over about 40 billion hours a year fetching water. This time that could be spent on other things. And up to 30% of sub-Saharan African countries restrict married women from participating in certain types of trade. So for example, in Nigeria, in certain parts of the country, women can't farm yams, which are quite lucrative. And although in sub-Saharan Africa we find that women dominate the agricultural labor force, it's usually as unpaid family labor. So now we turn to Nigeria. In Nigeria, we have 54 million out of our 80 million women and girls working in the rural area, making a living off land. But yet only 7.2% of these women own the land that they farm. Women only have 15% of women in Nigeria have bank accounts. We have one of the lowest rates of female entrepreneurship in sub-Saharan Africa. And when it comes to poverty, we have a rank of 106 out of 136 countries in the 2013 Gender Equality Index. And Nigeria is one of the top 5 countries with the largest share of the global extreme poor. So we join other countries like India, China, Bangladesh, and the Congo. Now, it's important to say that we have lots of frameworks, both internationally, regionally, and even in Nigeria, that talk about why it's important for women to be empowered and its link to human rights, whether it's starting from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights to the Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, which is usually described as International Bill of Rights for Women, and down to the Beijing Platform for Action of 1995, where economic empowerment was one of the 12 critical areas of women's concerns. And then after that, we had the MDGs. And Africa has responded to this with the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, on the Maputo Protocols in 2003, which is specifically for the rights of women in Africa, and today 36 countries have ratified this. And the AU has the Solemn Declaration on Gender Equality in Africa. And there's an endless stream of things from the ECOWAS to AU gender policy. And then when you come to Nigeria, we have a National Gender Policy of 2006, which aims to bring sustainable human development and a just society devoid of discrimination based on sex or circumstance. And we also have the MDG goals that tell us that we should have 30% women in our National Assembly by 2015, which is the next general election. And right now we're at 7%. So the reason I've taken time to explain all this, so to go through this, is just when you look at the data about Africa and you look at the data about Nigeria and you put that in context with all these policies and frameworks, I hope it gives us a better context to ask ourselves why, despite all these policies and frameworks, things are still so bleak. And so now I turn to the role of civil society in Africa and Nigeria. And the truth is, civil society has focused mainly on microfinance, complementary skill acquisition, vocational training, scaling up of businesses, business management training, and advocacy. And advocacy is usually of 2 types. One is to the societies and the communities, trying to get them to understand the benefits of having women who are productive in the society. And the other part of the advocacy is usually focused on government, trying to get them to do more and create a more enabling environment for women to participate in and to become more economically empowered. And these interventions are very effective. But the reason why I chose this picture is because I feel like although civil society is bearing the burden, trying their best to fill the gaps, they don't often see, like this atlas, what's going on all around them. So there's no bird's eye view. They're very focused on their burden, on what they're doing, but they can't see what's going on, and I think that's part of the problem. And so we talk about barriers and obstacles, and I don't want to spend any time on the very common ones that you find in all the reports. Every time we talk about women's economic empowerment, there's some key things you'll always find on those lists. A lack of infrastructure, access to finance is a problem, insufficient or inaccurate data, especially about the informal economy. And social gender constructs that was mentioned by one of the panelists, the fact that women spend more time on household chores, looking after children and elderly. All those things are usually there. But I want to take time today to talk about 3 things that we don't usually talk about, and I think it's very important. One of them is country commitment. Despite all these frameworks and all these policies and all these laws, I think it's especially glaring that when it comes to structural issues around access to justice, violence against women, property rights, budgetary allocations towards critical things like education and health, and government policy towards girl-child education, that our governments in the developing parts of the world are not doing enough. So all these things are just on paper. And these countries, like for example, Nigeria would sign up to CEDAW but refuse to ratify it. So we have all these frameworks and policies that sound good, but they don't translate into the countries actually committing what needs to be done to make the difference. And the second one is alignment. And I think this, for me, is where I was trying to go with the picture of Atlas, that there's not enough cohesion, even within civil society, to understand what's going on. And they're just replicating the same thing over and over again and dissipating energy. And the same goes for government. So government wants to achieve one thing, on the federal level, but the state government's policies are undermining these things every day, and I could give examples during question and answer. And the issue of hijacking, for me, is very critical. In Africa, and especially in Nigeria, first ladies play a very critical role somehow in gender issues. But the truth is they're very rarely gender advocates. And I find that this wholesale outsourcing of gender issues to first ladies is a very big problem that we don't address and we don't talk about. So lessons, I think, from what we've seen over the last 15 years is that member cooperatives are working. This is where women themselves are in charge of raising financing. Because the truth is the soft loans, the small soft loans that we see women getting, £60 here and there, they're really not enough to pull women out of poverty. They're just enough to keep them around the edge. We need more money. Capacity building, skills acquisition, I think the results are mixed because, again, women are desperate. They take advantage of the opportunity to sit in a classroom, but they don't really go away with much. How much skills can you impact to somebody over 2 days or 3 days to make that real difference? Well, we find CSOs spending a lot of time and money on this. And I think with the right incentives, we're finding in Nigeria that we're putting a lot of pressure on government to do creative things. And so there are very good examples coming out of Nigeria lately, like GWIN, which is Growing Women and Girls in Nigeria, where we're taking girls away from the traditional sewing and baking and making soap and saying, why can't girls learn how to build roads? Why can't they become electricians or mechanics? So that's a very good program.
In fairness to other speakers, I would like to ask you to wrap up.
Okay, sure.
I'll let you finish your sentence,
Sure.
unlike others.
So I'm just looking forward post-MDGs. I think when it comes to improving social conditions to allow for more women, we need to change the narrative around leadership. That's one thing in my list. In terms of developing policies to make capital, we need to break down the language around which women will be able to access this finance. They don't get it. They're not aware of these things. And in terms of using information, communication, and technology, I think the first panelist spoke beautifully on it. We just need to scale up on all the opportunities that are there. And I just want to say that, look, when it comes to justice for women and girls, patience is overrated. We've spent long enough. I'm a bit disappointed that at the 59th Commission on the Status of Women, we're still talking about these things, and so many women's lives are not improving. So we really need to understand that we need to do things differently. There needs to be a sense of urgency about what we're doing. It's not just a job. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you for being honest about the frustration that women are suffering and the dual frustration that women are suffering around the world. Apparently, the problems that you specify to Nigeria and Africa, even though they seem grave, they are not limited or specific to Africa. I mean, not only women in Africa, but women around the world lack own property much less compared to women. They are paid unfairly, unpoorly. So these are very interesting topics we would like to discover during the Q&A session, hopefully. Let's proceed to our final, the last but not the least speaker, Dr. Burak Eskici. He's from the Department of Sociology from Harvard University. He received his PhD in sociology at Harvard University actually last year. His thesis has investigated the historical, institutional, and cultural roots of different regional developments. Development trajectories in modern Turkey. I think he's going to present a case study from Turkey in that respect. Prior to his PhD, he studied in Istanbul at Bosphorus University, known to some of our listeners, I believe. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much for the organizers for providing this opportunity for sharing my kind of preliminary results of the case study. And I believe that with the other very rich presentations, it is going to be kind of complementing to the issue in terms of gender gap and the problems. So I personally study in the general sense. My research interest just lies between the culture and institutions, and how culture evolves throughout the years, and just the intersection between the culture, which I mean like the norms and social values, and the role of institutions on the culture. And I did a case study, and which I entitled the self-empowerment by doing, and I analyzed a small local NGO in Turkey run by women, and I tried to analyze kind of a micro-analysis of what is the process, the process by doing these women are feeling differently, or kind of redefining their power, realizing their self power in their life. So in the case of Hizmet Movement volunteers is my case study. So I just first start to introduce the case, and then I will try to talk about why this is important, why we should care about this, and what other things we can explain by looking at this case. I will try to share some data from Turkey, and I will just at the end turn back to case. I will try to give more information about the background of the Hizmet movement, and then the process which I'm trying to analyze in the micro level, in the personal lives, that women redefine their power and self potentials, and which I try to title with the self-empowerment by doing, and I will try to conclude some remarks on what does it mean for general social phenomena. I want to start with one personal kind of anecdotal, kind of an anecdote from the case. The woman you see is from the NGO that I just analyzed. She's Turkish, a Muslim, practicing Muslim, self-identifying, and she's at the age of 81, and she has 5 years of formal education, which is kind of normal in the 1940s. It was normal in Turkey. The female education participation rates were not very high, so in her cohort, this is kind of a normal years of education, and she's volunteering in the nonprofit, which is inspired by Hizmet movement. And what they are doing is, it is more like they are cooking, they are baking, and they are trying to help people or the students in need in the local small city of Anatolia. So when I had an opportunity to observe their activities, she pointed out from out of the window and showed me the dormitory, for which they collected money, and in which students in need for stay for free. And she said, "Look, son, we made it happen. Of course, under God's will. But we worked so hard. May God give the reward afterlife." So this was very striking. She's at the age of 81. She's kind of in the years of late years of her life, we can say. And you may expect her to maybe spend her time in the house, but she was working hard. She was baking, cooking, and doing some handcraft to sell. And this is not a lot of money. When you think about this, spending, let's say, a couple of hours, let's say spending 4 hours, and they were making maybe like $50, $60, which seems not very high in terms of monetary value, but it is very important for them. And since this is not the first intention to maybe self-empower, but during this process, by doing this, by achieving something, they believe or they redefine their self-power or the self-potential, we can say. So in the case, you see these are some very delicious, and they're organizing called kermes, which is kind of you can think about, they're selling these handcrafts and the baked goods. And this is, again, as I said before, a local NGO run by women, and I try to analyze their effort and individual processes in the micro level. And I was able to conduct in-depth interviews, kind of semi-structured, with 23 women in the ages between 45 to 81. And these are some outliers, so more like the 50 to 65, which we can think about. Most of them are, all of them are housewives, some of them are retired teachers, but these are from the middle or lower middle income families. And I was able to do some participant observation. So why this case is so important? I will turn back. I just want to talk a little bit about the theory of this study. So in the individual, in the micro level, we are thinking about the individual choice, and we are talking about the agency. People are taking decisions, doing something, whatever their lives, they are dreaming about something, they are trying to achieve their goals, but they are not completely free. And what brings us the structure. In the macro level, we are talking about the structure, which we can talk about the rules, culture, social norms, which sometimes shapes our behavior, sometimes facilitate our potential. And this goes back to the big or the long time discussion of agency versus structure. In the micro level, we are individuals trying to do something, but there's a structure on our head. And when we talk about agency, as I said before, this is about the will, the human capital, skill set, motivation, but most importantly, maybe from a social psychological perspective, self-realization of the potential. And maybe this is very important why we are not being able to achieve a lot in many issues in social problems, as well as in the gender gap in many areas. And when we talk about structure, there are two kinds of structure we can say. The first one is formal structure, like the government, laws, informal or written rules, and which they are there most of the time. They are shaping. Sometimes they are facilitating the women and other minorities or other people in the society. And at the same time, we have an informal structure. I only use 6 minutes.
44. I just, brought down.
I have this bullshit. Anyway, so we have also informal structure, which is the culture, unwritten rules and values and so on and so forth. And these are also shaped. So formal structure can change. There can be a reform in the government. There can be the UN, like the intergovernmental organizations, are very powerful to change the rules and laws. But sometimes it is hard, and it takes time to change culture and social values. So it is more kind of the problem in the case of gender gap as well. So if you look at some data in Turkey, Turkey seems a good kind of a well-standing country in terms of rules and regulations. A NATO member, a OECD member, and has lots of good rules in terms of gender gap. But if you look at the universal suffrage or the elections and participation, Turkey has universal suffrage since 1934. But what do we have now right now? If you look at this, we only have 77 women in the parliament out of 550, which is like 14%. And it's a good number. If you compare it in 2002, it was only 4%. So we have the rules, but the result, we don't see that. So if we can just quickly go over this. So if you go back to case, it is very important to form the formal structure, but it's not sufficient. So the culture, the relationship between culture and agency is very, very important. And I tried to analyze this micro process in which woman redefines and realizes their own potential. And if you go back to case study, this NGO, local NGO, is a kind of inspired by the Hizmet movement, which is a transnational civil society initiative, and which defines itself as a loose network of local nonprofits around some ideals. And we can just maybe summarize it as in the book title of the Gülen reader, which is "Live so others may live," kind of a motto we can say. So in this case study, as I just tried to briefly said, okay, I have 2 more slides. Okay, so in the case study, this is again local nonprofit, and just I want to emphasize their effort is, in terms of monetary value, not very valuable. But in this process, because they are expecting the reward in the afterlife, this is of course taking the motivation from the religion, but this is so important for them. But without their realization, they are redefining themselves. They are saying, look, we built this dormitory, we are trying to support this amount of people in the students in our city, so on and so forth. So in this process, it is very important to look at this byproduct. This may be not the most important thing, this may be not the first thing you see, but as you see people, the women, again, I want to just emphasize that these are the women between ages of like 50 to 65 and not very powerful in the society, but they are redefining by helping other people. So they do, I'm just finishing, they do for others in need, but they are shifting to a new understanding what they can achieve. So to conclude some conclusion, it's a very preliminary and the kind of first initial steps of the case study, but it will lead to new research area, and it is very important to solve this agency and structure problem. In the structure, we have rules, governments, laws, and everything, but in the micro level, in the personal level and in the cultural level, in the society level, still we have some problems. Maybe it is important to start with the woman and in personal, person by person, from the woman. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for sitting back.